The time between being elected as a member for the agricultural region and to being sworn in as a member of Parliament has been well over 8 months. This extended period of time has been one of mixed emotions, both of anticipation and trepidation, especially the latter in regard to this moment. I take courage from the fact that all new members have survived beyond the moment of delivering their inaugural speech. Mr. President, please accept my congratulations on your election as President of this House. Your 22 years of service in the Legislative Council will ensure that the proven parliamentary traditions of the Westminster system will be maintained and upheld during your tenure. I will take this opportunity to thank you for the courtesy and guidance you have given me as a member-elect. I wish to also express my gratitude and appreciation to the Legislative Council Clerk, Mr. Malcolm Peacock, and his staff for the highly informative induction sessions that they conducted for the 15 new members of this House. This is a very emotional moment for me, so superlatives such as honour and privilege do not adequately express the depth of my feelings in regard to my election as a member representing the agricultural region. This is the region where I have spent 47 years of my life, and I'm a wee bit older than that, but working and raising a family. I do know what it's like to earn an income in one of the harshest agricultural climates in the world. I have experienced the heartbreak of drought, fire, frost and hail. I've also experienced the warm glow of accomplishment following a kind season, that the lifting of morale such a season contributes to rural communities. Rural life is often hard. However, one of the greatest aspects of rural life is knowing that you belong to a community that values you as a member, regardless of the contribution you make to that community's well-being. Even in this modern era, citizens of rural Western Australia still unreservedly support their fellow community members who have experienced misfortune in whatever form that has adversely affected them. This is the world I grew up in, and this is the world that exists today in the wheat belt. This is the region that I represent, and I intend to champion the area's needs in a forthright, positive and common sense manner, both within this Legislative Council and within this Liberal-led government. Mr. President, as you would be aware, one does not arrive at this place unless you have support from a dedicated family and group of supporters, many of whom are here tonight. I will now pay tribute to my family and supporters for their commitment, effort and encouragement. My dad passed away in 2002 and my mum is present here tonight. I cannot think of a more appropriate way to thank both of them for the effort, commitment and sacrifices they have made on my behalf than by doing so now. My debt of gratitude to both of you can never be fulfilled. To my beautiful wife Sue, thank you. Thank you for your love, dedication and commitment, and for always being by my side through the ups and downs of farming and family life. Your inspiration and sound counsel will always put me back on the right track. To my 3 wonderful daughters, Rebecca, Alika and Tiffany, thank you for keeping me young at heart and always ready for the unexpected. I'm extremely proud of all of you. I will now also sincerely thank Mr. Murray Nixon, a past member of this council, for his guidance and support and for his uncanny ability to see trouble arriving well before it appears to us mere mortals. To Mr. Brian Mayfield, State and National Chairman of the Rural Policy Committee, thank you for being the Agricultural Team Campaign Manager and for your friendship. To the many members of the O'Connor Division, many of whom were Liberal candidates for the state election and campaigned on the hustings beside me, I sincerely thank and appreciate the efforts of Chris Wilkinson, now the proud father of twins, Jane Moritz, a tireless worker for the Liberal cause, Jamie Falls, Steve Martin and Stephen Strange, outstanding representatives of their communities as Shire members and Shire presidents, for the magnificent effort they made as candidates during the state election. I also thank the many branch members of the O'Connor Division and Pearce Division for their efforts, and I encourage them to keep them up in the future. I also congratulate Mr. Rick Wilson, the new President of the new O'Connor Division, and wish him all the best in his new role. My challenge is now to fulfil the faith all these people held in my ability to represent their communities in the political arena. I intend to do so, and to expend my energies in this direction to the very best of my ability. My family's long and active background in agriculture began in Australia when Charles Chown and his wife Eliza emigrated from England and sailed on the sailing ship, the C.W. White, arriving in Melbourne on the 6th of October 1860. In 1868, Charles, a bricklayer, selected a farming block at Holy Plain, Rosedale, Gippsland, Victoria. This property, now greatly expanded, is still owned by the Chown family. The current owner is young Elf Chown, who was ably assisted by his father, my uncle, Old Elf. The ownership of the original block has been in the family for 141 continuous years. My family's connection to farming in this state began in 1908, when my mother's father, Arthur Bell, and his two brothers, Robert and Anthony, travelled by horse to take up their recently acquired government-released blocks in Dalwallinu. I can still recall my grandfather telling me about this great adventure into the unknown, of how for the first 2 years they only stayed and worked during the winter months because there was not enough potable water for man or beast during the summer. Provisions were in tins, supported by fresh meat when it hopped past the camp. This experience of my forebears was exemplified by hundreds of other pioneers throughout the wheat belt. I'm certain that when these farming pioneers returned after a gruelling day's work to their bark and burlap bush abodes, they talked about the future of this state as they supped over the campfire and surveyed to the horizon an area full of trees and scrub, a vast area that had to be cleared with the aid of axe and animal. The challenge in front of them must have appeared overwhelming, but they persisted, and in time were successful in establishing productive farms because these early settlers understood that this opportunity to own land as private treaty holders would set in place the financial future for themselves, their families and their communities. They may not have understood that this right to own land as title holders is the financial keystone that underpins the financial well-being of this state and this nation. I wonder how they would have reacted to the fact that this state now has 31 separate acts that have the ability to devalue private property when exercised in the name of public good. The reality is that in this state, if your property is not actually reserved under a gazetted scheme, you are unable to receive any compensation for losses incurred. This is the situation for the majority of landowners in Western Australia. I believe the Liberal Party is the only political party that values the integrity of private property rights, and I encourage this government to implement private property legislation that addresses these inequities. I personally believe that such legislation is well overdue, because if we do not implement it, there is no other political party with the ability or wish to do so. I will also use this occasion to congratulate the government for its Royalties for Regions policy. This policy encompasses both national and Liberal campaign promises that will enhance regional infrastructure and improve rural and regional community standards of living. Liberal election commitments within the Royalties for Regions policy include a $30 million boost to the Royal Flying Doctor Service, increasing the Patient Assisted Travel Scheme to $30.8 million, $40 million to the Northern Town Development Fund, and I'll also note that the Treasurer Troy Buswell has recently allocated $200 million under the program to build 400 new residences for government offices and Home West applicants throughout the wheat belt and the regions. A $50 million commitment to the redevelopment of the Kalgoorlie Hospital, as well as approximately $135 million for a new Albany hospital. The program is also providing much needed funding for regional airport development, and also a natural gas pipeline to Albany is on the agenda. I look forward, along with my National Party colleagues, to supporting and promoting the benefits of Royalties for Regions throughout the area I represent. However, this policy on its own will not maintain or enhance the long-term fiscal viability of rural communities. Other government initiatives and programs and policies will. Initiatives such as the Red Tape Reduction Committee, otherwise known as the Red Tape Razor Gang, who at this time have received over 600 submissions from small business operators. It is anticipated that once their recommendations have been adopted, commercial enterprise will save approximately $1.7 billion over a 10-year period in regulatory requirements, and that's based on the Victorian model. Programs such as the Jobs Protection Package, recently announced in the budget, will apply to businesses with payrolls of up to $3.2 million. This translates to a large number of small businesses in the agricultural region who will be eligible for a significant payroll tax exemption, thus helping small business to survive in these challenging times. Another recent policy that will enhance the viability of rural communities and rural small businesses is the Wheat Marketing Act of 2008. This Act deregulated the export of wheat in Australia, and its success is best demonstrated by the fact that West Australian wheat growers have received a $35 a tonne premium above what they were previously getting. This premium relates to a $294 million premium over and above what growers normally would have received under the old marketing regime. And if you put in a multiplier effect of 3 or 4, this equates to over $1 billion going into the wheat belt and rural Western Australia. In fact, my feedback from a number of small businesses there, this year is one of the best they're having, regardless of the financial downturn internationally. It is policies such as this that will enhance the financial longevity of rural communities. In 2006, I was present when the then opposition spokesman for agriculture, Mr Gary Snook, launched his policy on the trialling of genetically modified canola at the Darren Field Day. It was a gutsy move by Gary, but Gary understood that the industry only exists today as a viable entity because it has always adopted and adapted the latest technological and scientific advances. GMOs are the next step in food production for an ever-expanding population, and as such must be explored in a managed way to assess the benefits of GM canola. I congratulate the Minister of Agriculture and Food, Mr Terry Redmond, for his courage and foresight in implementing a similar policy. This sentiment also applies to the 17 farmers who are actively participating in the demonstration of GM canola crops on their properties. There's been some local opposition to this policy, so it is interesting to note that in 2007 the Victorian Labor government called for an independent review on GMs. Based on the report, it found that there were no valid grounds to maintain a moratorium that prevented farmers from having the choice about the type of canola they wished to grow. Consequently, the Victorian moratorium on GMs was lifted on the 29th of February 2008. In the same year, 2007, the New South Wales Labor government announced their independent review also, and found that the introduction of GM canola to New South Wales would have minimal impact on market access or prices for the majority of Australian canola growers, and that the potential impact on markets and trade from GM food crops necessitated a clear path to market approach to regulation. The New South Wales moratorium was lifted on the 14th of March 2008. GM trials last year in both Victoria and New South Wales have demonstrated increased yields, a reduction in herbicide applications, and in both cases there has been no evidence of cross-contamination through pollination or during the transport process. The major concerns of segregation, coexistence, market access and price premiums have all been addressed through these cultivations, with no findings which would support the need for a continuation of a moratorium. In fact, the trialling has been so successful that the demand from growers in both those states for GM canola seed outstripped supply in the preceding months of March and April. And just some background information, in Canada, GM canola was introduced in the late 1990s, and since then the Canadian canola industry has left this country behind, and we need to catch up. In the last decade, higher margins in Canada through lower costs and increased yields has seen canola plantings expand to 80% of the area planted in Western Canada. This increase has also led to a solid growth in associated industries, such as a 60% expansion in canola oil crushings in that country. GMOs also impart significant environmental advantages. The Canola Council of Canada reports that the amount of chemicals applied to Canadian GM crops annually has been reduced by 6,000 tonnes. Less field operations have been required in the growing of GM canola in Canada, with the consequence that there has been a saving of dieseline of 31 million tonnes per annum. This equates to a saving of $13 million for growers, and these figures are based on a 2001 report. GM foods are the most scrutinised, analysed and peer group tested food source in human history. In fact, tens of millions of GM meals have been eaten by millions of people over the last decade. There have been no documented cases regarding any adverse effects from GM-derived food consumption, and I look forward to seeing the data from this year's trials in Western Australia. This state had partial regulation of its coarse grain industry under the Grain Marketing Act of 2002. This Act allowed the Grain Licensing Authority to issue special licence to exporters for coarse grains. We were the last state in Australia to have such a system for pre-described grains. In 2008, the Economic Regulatory Authority review found that the GLA was no longer needed. The Member for Agriculture has acted on this advice and has repealed the Grain Marketing Act of 2002, thus dismantling the GLA. At next harvest, this state will have a full deregulation for all grains. This deregulation will put significant pressure on both CBH and the transport system, because price and marketing premiums are achieved by exporting as much grain tonnage as possible during the Northern Hemisphere winter. In fact, industry has a desired export target of 2 million tonnes per month. This challenge, while significant, can be achieved if the key stakeholders in the transport and handling chain work cooperatively to implement a workable, competitive strategy that will meet the demands of the deregulated market. In regard to this, I congratulate the Minister for Transport, Mr Simon O'Brien, for his public statements that he will support and encourage competition both at portside and within the transport chain. On transport matters, I am confident that this government will uphold its election promise to enshrine the Harvest Mass Management Scheme in legislation. This legislation will hopefully be implemented at a convenient time, and I encourage the Minister for Transport to keep the current Harvest Mass Management standard of a 10% variation above the legislated axle loads for heavy vehicles carting grain. Mr President, I would also like this opportunity to voice my concern about the proposal to have Year 7s move from primary school to secondary school. A large number of wheatbelt towns that have primary schools residing in their areas use these schools as an educational and community focal point. If this proposition were to be adopted by the Education Department, it would negatively impact on not just the child, but the viability of schools in these small country towns, who already struggle to find teachers and resources. Such a proposal would also impact on the emotional and financial welfare of parents and students, who at the age of 11 would be required to move to either the city or to a larger regional centre to continue their education. The culture of regional primary schools would also be deprived of the leadership of their senior Year 7s provide to the rest of the school. In my mind, this proposed transition for Year 7s has no educational benefit, and I ask the Minister to consult widely with rural education specialists before making a decision on this matter. Mr President, due to time constraints, I've only mentioned a number of electoral concerns I've been recently involved in, and I look forward to discussing at a future time issues arising from the fishing, mining, tourism and the many commercial enterprises that make up the communities in the agricultural region. I look forward to working with a government that understands how unique West Australia is, a state within a nation that has an abundance of natural and produced resources which are urgently required by an insatiable world. A state of 2.2 million people whose contribution to the country is 27 to 30% of the nation's GNP. I look forward to working with a government that has a can-do attitude, a government that will ensure that we will advance the prospects and prosperity of all Western Australians. I will finish, Mr. President, by stating that as a new member in this place, I have observed over the past 2.5 sitting weeks both conciliation and confrontation. In fact, my first division, I witnessed the Labor members crossing the floor to vote with the government. I am fully aware that all members of this council, on both sides of the House, have the sincere intent to facilitate legislation so that it is not only workable, but complies with the requirements and expectations of today's West Australian community. I look forward to actively participating in this process over the next 4 years. Thank you for your politeness in listening.